Are your dresses ready for the temple festival? That was the question my mother asked me every single year. The very moment my final school exams came to an end. And that question meant it was time to pack our bags and return to my native village, Kandramanikam, located in the Sivagangai district of Tamil Nadu. During the 12-day temple festival, my village completely came alive. The streets were filled with music, celebration, and families returned from different cities. As a child, I simply thought I was going back for a grand holiday. But I never realized it would permanently shape the way I see nature. My parents and grandparents spun vibrant stories of their childhood memories of this place. And among those stories, the heart was the Oranis. Oranis are traditional Tamil rainwater harvesting water bodies designed to sustain villages through harsh summer. In Kandramanikam, there were several Oranis. My father would point at them and state their distinct purposes. One was strictly reserved for drinking water, and no one was allowed to contaminate it by any action. And another one for bathing, and another one for washing clothes. He used to narrate me stories about how he and his friends used to have swimming competitions in these Oranis. And slowly, listening to these stories, those Oranis became my first true connection with nature. But as years passed, every time I returned to the temple festival, I started looking at these Oranis more carefully, and what I saw was deeply painful. The places that existed so vividly in my grandparents' stories were fading away. The temple Urani, once the social and spiritual center of the village, was now frequently dry. And another Urani looked completely forgotten. And another one, located just a short walk from my home, has been degenerated into an open drainage. These were the exact same places where my parents had once swum, played, and collected pristine water. Now, these water bodies are almost dead. I started wondering, how did something that sustained an entire community reach such a tragic condition? Of course, there are modern explanations to this. Poor civic maintenance, public neglect, collective dumping. But standing beside these deteriorating Oranis at the time of the festival, where devotion reaches its highest peak, I realized this is where the paradox truly lives. Right in the middle of our grandest celebrations, the pressure on these water bodies peaks. In the name of faith, hundreds gather for taking sacred baths, cast away discarded clothes, and submerge ritual offerings laced with plastics and synthetic dyes. And this was not only happening in Kandramanikam. Across the entire country, from small village ponds to iconic holy rivers, the water bodies we revere the most are often the ones suffering deep damage. Surrounded by prayer and devotion, an uncomfortable truth hit me. We call our rivers mothers. We worship nature as divine. So why do our acts of devotion end up exhausting the same water bodies we claim to revere? I started to absorb a cynical idea. Maybe rituals and ecology were inherently on opposite sides. Maybe preserving tradition meant compromising nature. This was the story I believed until a visit to a nearby village named Kongarati rewrote the equation entirely. Kongarati is a nearby village from my hometown. We once visited to its annual temple festival, and something unexpected caught my attention. Before entering into the temple, my mother took me to buy some small clay idols. And to my absolute surprise, these were not shaped into gods, but into venomous creatures. Snakes, scorpions, lizards, brightly painted in synthetic neon colors. After praying, the devotees would immerse these clay idols into the village water body. The prayer behind this practice was deeply practical. If a venomous creature enters my home or comes into my vicinity, let it fall upon my eyesight before it harms me. In a rural setting, a venomous creature is dangerous because it stays hidden. Bringing visual awareness about these threats protected the community. But as I held that brightly painted idol, my father explained the hidden physical purpose behind the ritual. He explained that during scorching summer, the pond beds would often develop cracks, and immersing these clay idols, the clay would settle at the bottom, sealing those gaps and improving the pond's ability to retain water. And also during his childhood, these clay idols were made only out of purely unbaked river clay, without any paints or chemicals. The ritual that looked like a simple worship was actually a community-driven method to maintain the water body. Looking for proof behind my father's words, I have found that exact same mechanism documented in UN's Food and Agricultural Organization's Manual on Pond Hydrology. Section 3.2 calls it puddling, where clay materials work on dried basin to seal summer fishes, and Section 3.4 details how soil blanket made up of fine clay particles act as a liquid sealant, settling into the micropores and dropping permeability to near zero and forcing the pond to hold rainwater. This wasn't an isolated task. Just in hard drive from Kandramanikam, archaeological excavations at Keeladi uncovered 1,600-year-old terracotta pipelines and complex brickwater channels, proving that ancient Sangam-era communities were master hydraulic engineers, and they treated water management as a shared civic responsibility. Our ancestors were never choosing between faith and ecology. They designed an elegant system where devotion was the vehicle and environmental care was the result. The ritual was not separate from environmental care. The ritual was environmental care. But another question emerged inside me. If rituals once protected nature, then why do rituals today harm it? The answer was not that tradition itself was the problem. Over generations, the purpose faded. Natural clay became plaster of Paris, natural colors became chemicals, biodegradable materials became synthetic ones. The outer form survived, but the ecological wisdom behind it was lost. I stopped asking, should we abandon our rituals? Instead, I started asking, how do we restore its original purpose? As a person interested in sustainability, I often explore nature-based solutions. And one day, while learning about sustainable solutions, I came across the idea of seed idols. The concept relies to an authentic scale, creating small idols using natural unbaked clay, plant seeds embedded inside it. Now imagine the next scorpion idol immersed in that same Kongarati pond, not just sealing the cracks for another season, but leaving behind seeds that could grow on its banks. The ritual does not end after immersion. It continues through restoration. The seed idol is only one example. The larger idea is that, what if every tradition we inherit is not something we blindly preserve? What if we understand why it existed and redesign them for the world we live in today? When I was a little girl, I simply thought my parents were telling me stories about my village. And today, I realize they were passing down knowledge hidden behind tradition. Our ancestors understood that spirituality and ecology were never separate. Caring for elements that sustain life was itself an act of devotion. More than 2,000 years ago, Thiruvalluvar captured this wisdom in Tirukkural. Chapter 2, Excellence of Rain, Kural 20 states, just as the world cannot exist without water, the natural order cannot endure without rain. And these words remind us that water is not merely a natural resource. It is the foundation that sustains life itself. The challenge before us is not choosing between tradition and progress. It is carrying forward the wisdom while creating solutions for the future. Like Kandamanikam's Orani remind us that water is not just sacred because we pray beside it. It is sacred when it continues to give life. Let our traditions create pathway to restoration. Remember the wisdom, reimagine the ritual, restore the earth. Thank you.